correct, fast, beautiful, in that order. Most important thing is that like we don't do the wrong thing. You know, if the user tells us to do something, that it actually functions correctly. The second priority, once that works, is to make it performant. There shouldn't be unnecessary hiccups, and that it should feel smooth. The beauty is the last part. So I say this is our sort of design philosophy with these things, is making sure we get our priorities right. The bones have to work to the muscles have to be fast, and then you want to have nice skin. GM, sir. How you doing, Master Jangle?
I'm good. How are you?
We're here in the lobby. We're here in Forest City. We've got a lot of critters running around here, making noises, being animals, and it's great. I love it. I love living in a zoo.
Yeah, I affectionately call this place Biology Island. I enjoy being here. We are in the thick of it. We're in basically the living room for everybody. With a ridiculous studio setup, and it's kind of hilarious.
Yeah, no, it's true. We just claim this whole space here. So
yeah, it's very official business. Well, I'm here because we're launching a new testnet. Mm-hmm. By the time people watch this, it'll be live.
That's right.
I want to go over some of the architectural decisions that you and the engineering team have made for Quantus, and I guess we'll start with Substrate.
So
the bones.
Yeah, so basically, when we first started, the very first version of this project was a fork of Bitcoin. Yeah, and it was fairly simple to add a new address type that was post-quantum, and then put some logic in for the forking. But really, we decided that wasn't the right choice. One, without social consensus on Bitcoin, and it was just never going to be accepted. So
okay, address types. Talk to me about that.
Okay, yeah. So if you've used Bitcoin, maybe you've noticed that your wallet will give you an option. You can have like a SegWit or a Taproot or a legacy address.
Yeah, it's actually incredibly confusing.
Yeah, it's asking the user to think about cryptography, which is, I think, generally a bad decision. But sometimes it has to happen if the user's holding their own keys. So
there's already all these address types on Bitcoin, and for some reason you decided, hey, we need another address type. And so right. That was the V1.
That was the V1. It was kind of a proof of concept, like, can we do this? And okay. I was already familiar with the Bitcoin source code, so it was pretty easy to just swap a new one in. It really wasn't that big of a deal in terms of the technology is not the bottleneck for Bitcoin. It's all the other stuff. It's the migration. It's the dead founder.
Okay.
But that was the first version. So then our next version was, okay, we're going to do this from the ground up. Well, if we're not tethered to the legacy design of Bitcoin, what would we do differently? And so we took it as a chance to kind of like take all the best ideas from around the blockchain space and throw away all the ideas we didn't like. Bitcoin has a lot of great ideas in it. One is the 21 million cap. Another one is the focus on money and not on smart contracts. Mm-hmm. Ethereum's great, but smart contracts are really complex, and a lot of users, you're asking users to make decisions about things they have no understanding of. So basically, we decided to use Substrate, which is Polkadot's sort of library that they used to build Polkadot, and it's kind of like it's like an SDK for blockchains. You can pull pieces off the shelf. There's you want proof of stake, do it like this. You want fungible assets, go over here. You want NFTs, here's the thing. So it's a fairly complex system, but it was pretty easy for us to just reuse as many parts as we could, so that we didn't have to reinvent the wheel. But we've also ended up ripping its guts out and changing quite a lot of it. Probably the biggest change was, we wanted to make the entire chain ZK friendly, and
what is a ZK?
So ZK stands for zero knowledge, or zero knowledge cryptography, zero knowledge proofs. So generally, when you're writing something to be ZK friendly, you have to make it less complex. You want to make it more predictable, less wrinkles in the brain, more smooth brain.
Okay,
that's right.
Smooth brain. And that I understand.
Yeah, exactly. So it's interesting because it's kind of like the opposite direction that a lot of programmers would like to do. It's like, I want to squeeze optimization out of every little corner here, and actually just be simple to understand, because then it'll be simple to encode in this opinionated programming language.
Okay, so the beginning of Quantus, the proof of concept was a fork of Bitcoin, copy Bitcoin, paste it, add another address type, and that address type is using post-quantum cryptography.
That's
so
right.
A quantum secure address type.
That's right.
And then you realized that there's like limitations to the Bitcoin technology, the Bitcoin network, especially the lack of ZK first design. So
right. Yeah, putting ZK on top of Bitcoin is going to be quite torturous, and you know, I mean, I'm sure there's people who want it, you know, can do it. I mean, you know, a lot of the ZK people are saying if we just add one new opcode, opcat, that they can get us all this ZK stuff on, and that's great. It's definitely, you know, inconvenient. Just like ordinals were like a very creative way to shoehorn in NFTs that were not. It wasn't really natively supported. But the thing is, it's like there's this kind of a, I don't know if I'd call it a theorem, but there's this idea in generally like in the hacking community that you can tunnel any protocol through any other protocol as long as you have it's sufficiently powerful. So you can sort of like, you know, you can send your DNS queries, your HTTP queries through DNS, or you could like connect to the internet, but like do it through Minecraft.
okay.
So the idea is that really if you dissolve all this, you know, the sort of layers of abstraction, it's just bits at the bottom. And so if you can just get the bits in the right place, and then read them from the right place, you know, then everything else is kind of like window dressing.
But I guess the argument you would make is that you don't want to try to shoehorn some communication protocol through some other communication protocol. You would rather think of a specific thing you're trying to accomplish and build for that thing.
Yeah, we saw this as an opportunity to build, because it's also, you know, it's easier to build a new fence than to fix an old one. So making a quantum secure blockchain from the ground up was much easier than trying to migrate everyone. Time will tell if we made the right decision. You know, it could be that everyone, you know, quantum takes longer to get here, and everyone, you know, gets off their asses and does this migration, and then we're okay. It could be. And that would probably be the best outcome for like the crypto space as a whole. But there's a good chance that not everyone makes it through this great quantum filter, and in that case, you know, okay, well, let's prepare for that. This is like Noah's Ark for the quantum flood, and so this is a chance to sort of say, okay, we've seen all these different blockchains in the you know, last how many years has it been since Bitcoin started, and so why don't we take all the best ideas, leave out the bad ones, and just be very opinionated about how a blockchain should look. And
we've stayed proof of work.
That's right.
So keeping that idea, making it ZK friendly, is there anything about proof of work that you feel strongly about over proof of stake, or some other way to do consensus?
You know, I feel like I don't think proof of stake is inherently bad. It's a valid consensus mechanism. It seems to work quite well. It does give you a certain predictability. You can it's, you know, on average it's quite a bit faster. So I think there's advantages to proof of stake. But what I don't like about it is that you have to buy the coin in order to get access to the emissions. And whereas with proof of work, you can use a computer to do it. And that was one of the, you know, the really cool things about early Bitcoin is that it was like, if you have an internet connection and a laptop, you could get the coin, you could participate in the network. You know, there's this kind of like populist bottom-up kind of narrative around proof of work. It even has like kind of a Marx's labor theory of work in it, baked into it. It's like whoever does the most work gets the most coins, you know, of course, like, and of course reality doesn't work like that, but you know, these are kind of like, you know, simplified, you know, expressions and consensus mechanisms. You boil it down to like very simple things. So I think there's an elegance to proof of work and how simple it is, and it has stood the test of time. I mean, you know, Bitcoin has attracted enormous amounts of capital, both on the miner side and investment in the coin. So you know, there's lots of incentive to break Bitcoin, and the consensus mechanism seems pretty sturdy.
Okay, I talked to a lot of not crypto people
Sure.
today, and I asked them why they don't use crypto or what would make them want to use crypto. And generally their stance was, okay, mostly financial system works fine. I want it to be fast and easy. Proof of work seems like it might slow things down, right? Is there a way to make a proof of work blockchain fast and easy?
Well, I think as an extreme case of that, you could look at Caspa, and they sort of generalized proof of work where it's not just a string of blocks, but a whole tangle, multiple parallel streams or a DAG. And so they got, I forget what the throughput is, but I think it's like 10 blocks per second. So I'd say that's proof that, yes, proof of work can be fast. But even, we haven't done a full DAG thing yet. We may do that in the future. But with all these technology systems, there's all these layers. And the UI is one layer. The user's phone is another layer. So it feeling fast to the user is different from it being fast on the back end. So for example, credit cards take like 2 weeks to clear. But it doesn't feel like that because you get a little nice, haptic.
The sound is nice.
It is.
Yeah.
And it feels instant. And that kind of instant gratification is like whatever you want, it's right here at your fingertips. So, the fact that the ledgers around the world take time to synchronize and settle, that's invisible to most people, as it should be. The whole idea of a good product is something where you hide a lot of complexity so that the user's life can be made better.
Yeah. So, we're at this point where stablecoins seem incredibly useful. Even the back end of a lot of crypto that's not Bitcoin is pretty fast, but still it doesn't feel like that. Like it's such a slog to actually do payments and use crypto in your everyday life. Are there design decisions on the front end that you think are particularly important? How do you think about making things feel fast and easy?
Yeah, well, I like to say this, correct, fast, beautiful, in that order. So the most important thing is that we don't do the wrong thing. If the user tells us to do something, that it actually functions correctly. And then the second priority, once that works, is to make it performant, that there shouldn't be unnecessary hiccups and that it should feel smooth. And then the beauty is the last part. So I say this is our sort of design philosophy with these things, is making sure we get our priorities right, from the sort of the bones have to work to the muscles have to be fast, and then you want to have nice skin. There's also, we have to factor in the human into the system as a whole, both the humans making it, the engineers who are writing the code, and so that comes down to having very clear variable names. Like if the code is confusing, that means the person who wrote it was confused. And if that's the case, then probably there's bugs. And and likewise, it also includes the human who's using the interface. And so, we have these things called checksums on all the crypto addresses, but they're not for humans. And so then who's checking it? And so people lose money all the time in crypto in an irreversible way. And it sucks. It's a real stain on the industry, to be honest. It's why we can't have nice things. Not that we can't have nice things, but things would be a lot better if we really focused on taking all the good ideas from TradFi and applying them to crypto. Because TradFi, normal people can use banks. People who are not experts in cybersecurity. Your grandma probably has an online bank. Maybe she struggles with it a little bit, but she's able to use it. So, what's keeping crypto from being like that?
Well, we have a lot of ideas about that.
We do, actually. We do.
Yeah, I mean, being here at Network School, a lot of people accept stablecoins. People use cash. More people use PayPal, Venmo, Wise, Revolut, and these are people who, a lot of them, at least a third of them, maybe half of them, identify as crypto people, but still, when you say, okay, let's get a coffee, they are going to pay with TradFi. Like, even if they're ideologically aligned to crypto, even if they have a substantial amount of their net worth in crypto, they still don't actually want to use crypto because it's not better, right? I mean, certainly Bitcoin is not better, right? Creating a Bitcoin wallet, you have to make a decision about which address type you're going to use.
Right, yeah.
Right? There's no, I mean, I've never used a Bitcoin wallet that allows me to have a feeling of instantaneous settlement, or at least maybe not even finality, but like an instantaneous transaction or a sub 2-second transaction experience. I feel like every time I sign a transaction, even in wallets that are very retail consumer facing like Phantom, right? If I want to send somebody money, I'm presented with like hex data, just like a string of text. And it's like, all right, well, approve, right? And it's like 2 or 3 button clicks. Like, why? Is there a reason why this is so difficult for the industry to figure out, and especially, Bitcoin?
It's a deep question. Part of it is there are, I think, more difficulties with making a decentralized system where users hold their own keys. So in some sense, the user has more responsibility, and so their life is a little bit harder. I mean, that's, it's with a centralized system, where you can control their passwords, and you can sort of, you're trying to do everything for them to make them. It's sort of like, if you're a baby, it's life is easier, than if you're an adult. So, like, assuming someone's taking care of you, So,
but it could be a lot worse if somebody's not, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's why we, So in the early days of Bitcoin, I remember like Americans and a lot of Europeans were like, why should I care about Bitcoin? I have my credit card, and they were mostly right for their little chunk of space time. But if you try to send money overseas, that was where suddenly there's all this friction, and you're dealing with all these bureaucrats and middlemen and high fees and long wait times, and so for a while Bitcoin was like clearly superior to that experience for international payments. In addition to the inflation resistance, which is, inflation is generally dwarfed by volatility until you have a massive pool. So it's sort of like, it's more of a ideological or kind of long-term thinking thing. So most people are not thinking about inflation resistance, and if they are, they're probably thinking of Bitcoin as like a savings account rather than a day-to-day payments thing. So now we've got all these, not just stable coins, but also like, Venmo and Revolut and all these other services, these neobanks, have made using banks quite a bit easier. They've made online payments quite a bit easier. And so I'd say that, that UX for advantage that crypto had in the early days, we lost it. And I think we can get it back, or at least be at parity with TradFi. We shouldn't be that much worse. Ultimately, it's just computers passing information around. So we invented this thing called check phrases, which is like, you have your address, which is like, it's a random string, and of course everyone just looks at the first few and last few to check if it's the right one, and then sometimes you accidentally send it to the wrong one because it could be malicious or just by accident, and so we thought, okay, why don't we make a human-readable address, and we used a couple simple, well-known tricks in cryptography to do that, but we use that to derive 5 random words. And so the words are, 5 words is something you can remember. It's something you could say over the phone to your friend, and you can easily display it on the screen. And it's not so many that you can't read all 5. It might even tell a fun little story that kind of like helps you remember it. So we're wired for like linguistics and storytelling and narratives, not so much for like hexadecimal bytes. So like showing the user hex, or random strings of characters, your mind just kind of your eyes glaze over, and your brain is like, this isn't important because I don't understand it. And although it is important that you send it to the right address.
Yeah, it's incredibly important.
Right.
It's,
There's
no takesies backsies. As they say.
well, and so, but that was another thing we decided to do was takesies backsies. We were calling them reversible transactions, but now I think actually takesies backsies is the best name I've heard so far.
Yeah.
But basically, you need to be able to. People make mistakes. They send too much. They send to the wrong address. If you're dealing with large sums of money, you will probably, want some kind of time lock on it. So this is the sort of experience you can get if you're like a high net worth client at a bank. They'll have someone like a personal account manager who will call you to make sure everything's okay, and they can have mandatory wait periods on your, outgoing wires over a certain limit and that sort of thing. But crypto doesn't really have that, maybe in some, little corners, but I think this is a core element of money. You should, it doesn't matter whether you're rich or poor, you don't want to lose your money. And however much is a lot for you is still a lot for you. So I'd love to, so we basically built this into the chain that you can, if it's an account that's, where you're saving money, you can put a mandatory time limit on it and assign somebody else as a guardian. And so that guardian can intercept any outgoing transactions during that time. So the idea is that this could be like, okay, maybe like I'm a kid and that guardian is my parent, or it could be like, I've got my, life savings on my phone, but it's backed up by my hardware wallet, and so if somebody steals my phone, I can just grab the funds. So there's always this tension between convenience and security, and so we've tried to sort of straddle both by like you have a secure wallet and you have a convenient wallet, but the secure wallet can override the convenient one. And I think this is actually a very natural design pattern. We kind of think of it as like security Legos. They're composable. You can have chains of these things. Like the Bybit hack could have been prevented if they had say, a 48-hour mandatory wait period on any outgoing transaction.
The drift hack.
The drift hack, same thing. The fact that crypto settles instantly is great for many use cases, and it's terrible for other use cases. And so we should allow people to express their desired level of security with a time lock. And so this is something where I feel like, normal, and a lot of people also, they want somebody, we call it pick your policeman. They want somebody to look over their shoulder in case something goes wrong. And that might be like you have a technical family member who knows more about crypto than you, or you have it could even be the credit card company or the bank, or, your family's trust or something.
But
like
you
that.
get to choose.
You get to choose.
And it's optional.
That's right. It's optional. If you want to just YOLO and go fast, instant, then that's your business. That's your choice.
or even if you feel like you are technically competent enough, and I am going to read the hex data, or better yet, you limit what users can actually sign, right? And so that everything that they could possibly sign is clearly displayed and easy for anyone to understand. And then if you want, then you can give a third party or another wallet that you have, a more secure wallet, the ability to reverse or backup or custody or these sorts of things that protect your assets. So you can add another optional layer that is somebody else, that is you, and you can get a little bit of the optional like Big Brother protections, right? People want custodians generally.
Right. Yeah. Well, and it's Big Brother. I mean, invokes like Orwell, and that's a sort of like a bad father archetype. But there's also good fathers, right?
Yeah.
And so we want, I think, to cultivate good fathers, and this whole blind signing thing. Yeah. Where like, okay, I have a multi-sig and each key is a hardware wallet, but then I get this message of what I'm signing, and it's just obscure hex. I have no idea what I'm signing. Blind signing is an absolute plague on this industry. It basically completely defeats the purpose of having a hardware wallet. If the hardware wallet doesn't know what you're signing, then it's pointless to have a hardware wallet. You might as well just give your keys to the software that generated the message you're signing. So,
because it's passing along that message.
Yeah.
And you can't verify what that message is. Right. And you're signing it. Exactly. So the software might as well be what you're signing the transaction on, because you're fully trusting whatever it presents to your hardware wallet.
Exactly. Yeah. So this has been, but this was a direct consequence of Ethereum being so-called featureless, where they're like, oh, you could put any software on Ethereum, and it's very open-minded and creative, and I mean, there's a lot to love about Ethereum, but the average smart contract on Ethereum is like a piece of shit. It's either broken, it's not being used, it's malicious.
It's got admin keys that can just rug the funds, and it's
right.
a nightmare.
So it can be upgraded via upgradable proxy. I mean, this was such a ridiculous design pattern. I really like.
It's everywhere.
And why? Because what if we make a mistake and we need to fix something? Like, okay, well, why don't you just use a database then? And it's crazy. I mean, even like TradFi and the new law, the Clarity Act, I think they're clarifying that like if there's an admin key that can rug everyone, then it's not decentralized. And
so Ethereum being featureless means that all of these different design patterns can pop up, all these different smart contracts can pop up, and we've presented some ideas like guardian accounts or reversible transactions or things to protect the user, but like having a chain where you can just send money means that your attack surface for things to go wrong is much smaller. And then if you want a few other things, a few security features, things like check phrases, things like guardian accounts that can reverse outgoing transactions to prevent fraud. You can build them in a very opinionated way, so that it's not just this smorgasbord of whoever can publish smart contracts, because then if anybody can publish smart contracts and the users can sign any of these contracts, then the hardware wallets don't know how to interpret all this arbitrary data that's being presented to them, and then you have to have blind signing. So like this user experience nightmare of crypto, really like the root cause of all of it is a lack of opinionated design at the protocol level. Like this arbitrary code that Ethereum kind of pioneered in the crypto world that got us away from the Bitcoin, like it's just send and receive. It actually created a plethora, like all of this security, these security nightmares, basically.
I think so, and I think, it's good to see, I think Vitalik is becoming more opinionated. He kind of like, let go of the wheel for a while, and he's like coming back in and telling everyone to stop with the L2 nonsense. But really the being a smart contract platform means, anybody, including criminals and people you don't like, and, can come write logic and then use that to, quite often steal money from people. I believe in freedom. I think it's good that something like Ethereum exists, but I think it's good to also realize that like that much you're asking people to be experts in cybersecurity when they go put significant amounts of money on Ethereum. You're trusting in many layers of abstraction. You need to be able to make this whole idea of informed consent, right? You need to be able to make an informed decision about every action you take, especially if you're being responsible for someone else's money. And how do you do that on Ethereum? Any function you call could be named anything. It could do anything. There's like this gigantic design space of like what this, like this ERC20 thing. I mean, it was so celebrated for a while, but actually like there's kind of like one or two correct ways to do an ERC20 contract, and then there are a bunch of wrong ways to do it. A whole bunch of malicious ways, or ways that are sort of like, just bad designs. So why let everyone implement their, because the ERC20 is just a set of function names, essentially. You can implement them however you want. I think Solana took a good step in this direction by saying, look, we've got, there's a Solana program library, and that covers like 80-90% of the use cases in a blockchain, and they've already been written by the Solana people. They're all audited, and so like, if you go on pump.fun or any Solana token, like they're basically all exactly the same source code. And so that lets me not worry about the technology underneath it. Instead, I can worry about, the team and what the coin is for. And so they took a step in that direction, and I feel like we're taking a step further. Is like actually, there's like 4 or 5 smart contracts that you need, and look, if you want to write your own, go somewhere else.
So these SPL Solana program libraries are much more they're basically at a very opinionated, similar to ERC20, but but highly opinionated.
That's right. Yeah, they implemented it for you instead of giving you an interface that you can plug into.
Yeah.
They're just like, this is the token contract, and everyone copy pastes that.
Okay.
And this is the NFT contract. Everyone copy pastes that. So.
And it seems to work better. It seems to work better. Like there's less variation. Is that the reason why I've noticed on Solana I get much less of these random spam tokens? I think, is that because you have to like pay an initial gas fee to like create a token account in a Solana address, in a Solana wallet?
Basically, yes. Now the thing is, Solana made was quite opinionated, and they made a set of trade-offs. And one of them is it's very fast to update an existing account and very cheap to update, but it's kind of expensive to create it. And so if you airdrop to 100,000 addresses, you're going to spend quite a lot of money. If you are sending 100,000 transactions to accounts that already exist, it's actually not very much. So there's all these, engineering is all about trade-offs. Sort of a mark of a beginner engineer is that you sort of you sort of imagine that there's a free lunch, that you can sort of you just do this and it'll be, net better no matter what, just add a feature and now it's more powerful. And actually that every feature is taking up cognitive space in your head as an engineer, also your users' minds. It's like, okay, now it's more complex to understand. They have to juggle more things, and then, do these features interact correctly? And so this complexity trade-off is, inherent in anything you build in technology.
So Quantus is prioritizing quantum security.
Yeah.
Security broadly, I think you could just say security. Number one priority, security.
Yeah.
And probably 2 or 3, privacy and scalability. At the expense of complexity and flexibility. Because when you talk to people who are using Wise or Revolut or Venmo or PayPal, they're not using it because it's highly composable. Right?
That's right. Yeah.
They're not using it because it's general purpose or flexible or cypherpunk. Like they're using it because it's fast and it's easy, and they're probably not going to lose all their money. Take these cypherpunk ideals, take this sovereign money, and make it fast and easy and secure.
Yeah, that's the dream. It goes back, in my mind, it goes back to the Bitcoin white paper, peer-to-peer electronic cash. It's peer-to-peer, so there's no trusted third parties. It's electronic, so it's not physical in your hand, paper. It's it's through the internet, and it's cash, meaning you can pay for things with it. That dream is still alive. Even if people are talking about maybe Bitcoin will die because of quantum, and I don't think it will, but even if it did, the idea of a decentralized monetary system is definitely not going to die, and so that's the vein we're building in. But I'm not, at the same time, I'm not a maxi. I think this sort of fighting with all the other blockchains is sort of it's not negative. It's sort of you're punching down if you're Bitcoin, and you're whereas the pie is much bigger than crypto. Crypto is a little piece of the pie, and we're all scrambling, fighting each other for the same pile of users, capital sloshing around, versus there's all these people in the world, all this capital floating around that's much larger pile. So there's more to gain by the crypto people ganging up on the people who want to weaponize finance and use it to sort of force you into a political corner. That's what these CBDCs and the whole MICA regulations, where they're oh, you can't self-custody crypto, and the ethos through all of this is a kind of a slaver mindset. That they think that you're their property and that everything you own actually belongs to them, and they get to decide what when you spend your money, and it's all for your protection, because you obviously can't defend yourself. You need them for protection, and if that's what you grew up in, then it just feels normal. But if you didn't grow up in that and you see that happening around you, it's alarming. It's guys, that's a cage. I also think that's what's going on with all this AI stuff. They've got this new Mythos thing that Claude Anthropic released, and they're trying to scare the shit out of everyone.
Great marketing.
It's highly effective. Fear is like, in some sense, the most powerful emotion, and at the same time, it's like, they're playing on the fact that most people don't understand much about cybersecurity, and so they can just they said, oh, we have found so many critical vulnerabilities, and like, okay, guys, like did you actually double check on, are those critical vulnerabilities, and like, is this actually a new thing? I mean, we're using AI to find bugs as well. Like, yes, it's good at finding bugs. That's great. Like, let's just keep doing that instead of, like, oh no, sorry, this thing is too powerful, but let me make a marketing video to tell you about it, but you can't touch it. Like,
well, now I want to touch it.
Yeah, I want to touch it. So, we have so many cybersecurity issues. Like, we've decided that like computers are definitely the best way to build a civilization, but the average program probably has like, multiple critical security vulnerabilities in it, just waiting to be discovered. And then the people who have enough resources and expertise to sit around looking for all of them are generally people who would benefit from exploiting them. So
I think the trend is just reduce the attack surface, like keep your keys offline.
Yeah.
Right. Or maybe don't give unlimited permissions to the surveillance AI that's storing all of your all the context you give it in Anthropic or OpenAI server. So maybe if you're reimagining quantum secure encrypted money, maybe you don't have general purpose smart contracts everywhere that anybody can publish, right? Just reduce the attack surface so that you can make trade-offs where, okay, maybe you're sacrificing complexity and you are gaining scalability and security and privacy. And so I think that's my primary takeaway.